The story begins at one of America's most prestigious colleges, MIT. We see Professor Gerald teaching his mathematics class. After finishing his lecture, he tells his students, "I'm going to write a very difficult math problem on the board outside the class. Whoever among you solves it will have their name written in golden letters in the history of this college." He motivates them further by saying, "Some of my students have solved similar problems before, and today they are at the top of their respective fields." It was indeed a very hard problem, so Professor Gerald gives them until the end of the semester to solve it carefully. When the lecture ends, we see Will hunting, a janitor who works there, cleaning the hallway. He notices the math problem written by the professor. Later, when Will goes home, he starts working on the equation on his bathroom mirror. The next day, when no one is around, he picks up a piece of chalk and writes the answer to the problem on the board. This was something incredible. He solved the unsolvable question in just one day. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald discovers that the math problem he wrote has been solved. He rushes to check the board and finds that someone has indeed solved it. He asks his top students, "Was it any of you?" When they deny it, Gerald is completely shocked. In his next class, the room is packed. Everyone wants to know who the mysterious math genius is. The professor announces, "Whoever solved this, please come forward. I want to give you your reward." But the class just looks around at each other. No one steps forward. Since no one admits it, the professor writes another, even harder math problem, one that took him 2 years to solve. He says to himself, "Let's see if this so-called genius can solve this one in a day." Meanwhile, apart from work, Will spends most of his time hanging out with his friends. One day, while watching a baseball game, he sees a guy who used to bully him back in school. Seeing him triggers Will's anger. He walks up to the guy with his friends and starts a fight. In the end, Will beats that guy badly, taking revenge for the past. Before things get worse, his friends pull him away, but the police arrive, and when an officer tries to stop him, Will attacks the cop instead. As a result, he gets arrested. After some time, Will has just gotten out of jail. He goes back to cleaning at MIT and immediately starts solving the new problem. Just then, Professor Gerald walks out of his office and spots Will writing on the board. Thinking he's just scribbling nonsense, Gerald tries to stop him, but Will quickly runs away. Later, when Gerald returns, he's stunned to see that Will actually solved his problem, the same one that took him 2 years to crack. Now Gerald finally knows who the secret math genius is. After work, Will heads to a bar for a few drinks. There he meets a girl named Skyler and has a good time. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald is determined to find the janitor who solved his problem. After some inquiries, he manages to get Will's contact and shows up at his court hearing. Will is facing charges for assaulting a police officer. He tries hard to defend himself in court, but the judge reminds him of his past: theft and assault charges. "I can't overlook another violent act against a cop," the judge says. Finally, the judge sentences him to jail and sets bail at $50,000. While in jail, Will meets Professor Gerald, who offers him a deal. "I've spoken to the judge," he says. "I can get you out, but on 2 conditions. The first condition, Will must study mathematics with Professor Gerald. The second, he must attend counseling sessions." Will laughs at the idea, but he doesn't want to stay in jail, so he agrees. Soon, Will starts his math sessions with Professor Gerald, who is blown away by the young man's brilliant mind. Now it's time for the second part of the deal: therapy. But no matter how many therapists he meets, Will never opens up. In fact, he mocks them. He reads their published books before each session, and then uses their own words to insult them. Finally, as a last resort, Professor Gerald reaches out to his old friend Sean McGuire, who now teaches psychology. At first, Sean refuses, saying, "I don't have time for this nonsense." But when Gerald explains, this kid is special. If he doesn't find the right path, he'll waste his life. Sean agrees to meet Will. Just as he'd done with the others, Will reads Sean's book beforehand and starts mocking him during the session. But Sean remains calm, speaking normally and not asking anything personal. Then Will notices a painting Sean made himself. After observing it, Will begins making rude comments about Sean's life. Sean still keeps his cool until Will starts talking about his wife. The moment he mentions her, Sean loses his temper. He grabs Will by the throat and warns, "Don't ever disrespect my wife again." Will smirks and says, "Time's up." And Will walks out, proud that he'd broken another therapist. Seeing Sean's reaction, Professor Gerald assumes he won't continue the sessions. But surprisingly, Sean says, "No, I'll do it. Bring him to me every week." After one such session, Will goes on a date with Skyler. He learns she comes from a wealthy family and is studying at Harvard. They have a wonderful time together, and at the end of the date, they share their first kiss. When Will meets Sean again the next week, Sean says, "Let's go outside and talk." He takes Will to a park and begins a heartfelt conversation. Sean said, "I've thought a lot about what you said, and in the end, I realized that you're just a kid. A boy who doesn't even understand what he's saying. You're rude, arrogant, and scared. I understand you don't want to talk, maybe because you're afraid. But remember one thing, son. One day, you'll have to open up, or else you'll lose all the good things life has to offer." The next day, he wanted to call Skyler, but he was too nervous to talk to her. During his third therapy session with Sean, Will didn't say a single word, and neither did Sean. The entire 1-hour session passed in silence. The fourth session started the same way. No one spoke. But after a while, Will got bored and cracked a joke. Sean took that as a sign that Will was finally ready to talk. Sean asked, "Do you have a girlfriend?" Will smiled and told him about Skyler, how amazing their first date was, but how now he's scared to talk to her. Sean asked, "Why is that?" Will said, "I think Skyler is too good for me. If I keep seeing her, I'll just mess it up. Someday she'll figure out I'm not good enough for her." Sean calmly replied, "No one's better than anyone, Will. Everyone has good and bad sides. What matters is whether that person is right for you or not." To explain further, Sean started telling Will about his wife. "She was an amazing person," he said. "I loved her deeply. But sometimes, in her sleep, she used to fart." The room filled with laughter. The serious tension melted away. Both Will and Sean laughed openly, and for the first time, Will felt comfortable around Sean. As the session ended, Sean said, "Go talk to that girl." Will got so lost in Sean's advice that Sean had to remind him, "Hey, the session's over. Go now." Following Sean's words, Will went to Skyler's college and asked her out again. Skyler said, "I'd love to, but I'm working on a very tough math problem. It could take me days." Will smirked. "Show it to me." He looked at the question, and within seconds, he wrote the answer on a napkin. "Now you've got no excuse," he said. "Let's go." On their second date, Skyler asked about his family. Will lied. "I have 12 brothers." Amused, she said, "Oh, really? Name them all." Will instantly rattled off 12 random names in order. Skyler grew suspicious. "Say them again." But Will, the genius he was, repeated the same 12 names in the exact same order. Later, during another therapy session, Will asked Sean, "Do you ever regret meeting your wife? I mean, after she died, you must have been so lonely. You loved her so much. That must have hurt." Sean replied with a nostalgic smile. "The first time I saw her, she was standing in line with her friends, waiting for tickets to a baseball game. It was a legendary match." Will said, "Wait, you saw that game live? Man, you're lucky." Sean shook his head. "No, I watched it later on TV. I skipped the game to go on a date with her, the girl who later became my wife." Will couldn't believe it. "You missed such an epic game just for a girl." Sean smiled and said, "I never regretted it, not even once. Even if she was only in my life for a few years, those were the best years of my life." Meanwhile, Skyler met Will's friends at a bar, and she liked them all immediately. They had a great time together. Later, Professor Gerald came to talk to Sean about Will's progress. Sean said, "He's slowly opening up, but it'll take more time for him to feel comfortable." Gerald said, "I'm finding him a top-level job. Once his mind settles, he'll crack any interview easily. Nothing can stop him from making a name in mathematics." Sean frowned. "Who are you, his father? Stop making life decisions for him. Let him choose what he wants to do." Gerald insisted. "He's too talented to waste his life." "I won't let that happen." But Will had no interest in any fancy job. So, he sent his friend Chucky to the job interview pretending to be him. One night, while talking about life, Skyler said, "Will, come with me to California." Her words made Will nervous. "I can't," he said. "My whole life is here." Skyler looked into his eyes and said, "I know you love me. So why are you so afraid to come with me? Why don't you ever tell me the truth?" She added softly, "I know you lied. You don't have 12 brothers." Hearing that, Will lost his temper. "You want to know the truth? I'm an orphan. I don't even know who my parents were. I spent my childhood bouncing from one foster home to another. The last family I stayed with used to beat me like a dog." Skyler's eyes filled with tears. She said, "That's okay. I'm here for you. I'll stay with you no matter what." But Will pushed her away. "I don't need anyone's help." Deep down, Will was terrified, afraid that if he let someone close and they left, he wouldn't survive it. Skyler cried and said, "I love you, Will. I'll never leave you." But Will lied again. "I don't love you." Then he walked away, leaving her crying alone in her room. After much convincing from Professor Gerald, Will finally agreed to go for a job interview. But when he went, he didn't even try to get hired. During his next therapy session, Sean asked, "Who do you trust the most in your life?" Will answered, "My friend Chucky." Sean nodded. "Yes, I believe that. He's like your brother. He'd die for you. But you can't spend your whole life with just your friends." Then Sean asked, "So how will you make a living?" Will said, "I'll do construction. I'm good at it. I can work, earn, and eat. That's enough." Sean replied, "You've done it for so long that labor work has become your comfort zone. You're afraid to step out of it. And that fear will stop you from living a better life." Sean didn't tell him to take Gerald's job offer. Instead, he asked, "What do you want to do with your life?" Will shrugged and joked, "I want to herd sheep." Sean immediately realized Will wasn't serious. "Then get out," he said. "I don't want to waste my time. Maybe you have time to joke around. I don't. If you can't answer honestly, leave." Will got angry and shouted at him. Sean stayed calm, but asked again, "What do you really want to do with your life?" Will stayed silent. Sean pointed to the door. "Get out." Before Skyler left for California, Will called her to say goodbye. She said one last time, "I love you." Will smiled but didn't reply, still scared, convinced that love only leads to heartbreak. The next day, while talking with Chucky, Will said, "I'm not taking any job. Skyler's gone. You and I will just keep working construction. We'll live here, same as always." Hearing that, Chucky spoke from the heart. "Listen, 10 years from now, I'll still be here, doing the same job. But if you're still here in 10 years, Will, it'll break my heart." Chucky continued, "I've got one. Every morning when I come to pick you up from your house, a small voice inside me says, I hope he's not here today. I hope he's doing something better with his life." Meanwhile, Professor Gerald and Sean were arguing about why they still couldn't convince Will to take a job. Sean said, "We can't force Will to make such big decisions about his life. He doesn't even know what he truly wants yet." He continued, "Will is terrified of being abandoned. That's why he never lets anyone get close to him." Gerald disagreed. "Don't let him waste his life, Sean. What are you trying to do? Make him a failure like yourself?" Sean looked him in the eye and said calmly, "I'm not a failure. I chose this life, and I'm happy with it. Genuinely happy." At that moment, Will walked in and overheard their conversation. Gerald, feeling awkward, quietly left the room so the therapy session could begin. Sean had a file with him that day, full of photos showing the bruises and scars on Will's body from the beatings of his foster father. Sean asked softly, "Have you ever seen a kid beaten this badly before?" Will shook his head silently. Sean then said, "My father was an alcoholic. He used to drink and beat me and my mother." Hearing Sean's story brought back all of Will's painful childhood memories. Sean stood in front of him and said gently, "Whatever happened to you, son, it wasn't your fault." Will nodded slightly. "Yeah, I know," but Sean repeated it, looking straight into his eyes. "It's not your fault, son." Will's expression changed. "I know," he said again, trying to hold it together. Sean stepped closer. "It's not your fault, Will." This time, Will's voice broke, and at that moment, Will completely broke down. He hugged Sean tightly and began crying uncontrollably, years of buried pain pouring out all at once. He was finally ready to let go of his past and move forward. After that, Will decided to take one of the jobs Professor Gerald had lined up for him. That session was his final therapy with Sean. Before leaving, Will asked, "If someday I just want to talk again, can I come back?" Sean smiled and said, "My door will always be open for you." Will hugged him one last time and said goodbye. On Will's 21st birthday, his friends surprised him with a car. It wasn't new, but it was the best gift he could have imagined, because it came from his closest friends. Later, Professor Gerald visited Sean and apologized for calling him a failure. The two old friends reconciled, and Sean revealed, "I'm going on a world tour. I'm not as broke as you thought." As Sean packed his bags for the trip, Will arrived outside his house in his car. He smiled, walked up to the door, slipped a letter into Sean's mailbox, and quietly drove away. The next morning, Chucky came to pick Will up for work. He knocked on the door. No answer. He peeked through the window and saw the house empty. Chucky smiled. He understood. Will had finally figured out what he wanted to do with his life. Later, Sean found the letter in his mailbox. It was from Will. The letter said, "I'm not taking the job. I'm going to California to see Skyler." Sean smiled warmly after reading it. He whispered to himself, "Well, good for him. He finally got the girl. That genius will be just fine." With this beautiful ending, the movie comes to an end. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.